The rifle was too heavy. That is the first thing I remember. Not the fear, not the cold, the weight of the rifle in my hands, and the fact that my arms were shaking before I had fired a single shot. Not from fear, from the weight. I was 14 years old, and the rifle weighed almost as much as I did, and nobody had thought to mention this when they handed it to me. The man beside me was 42. His name was Sergeant Aldrich. He looked at my arms shaking, and he did not say anything about fear or courage or the fatherland. He looked at my arms shaking, and he said, "Lean it against the wall. Use the wall. Your arms will give out in an hour if you do not use the wall." That is the first piece of military advice I ever received, from a 42-year-old man to a 14-year-old boy in a foxhole in Germany in March of 1945. Lean it against the wall. I need to tell you about Sergeant Aldrich, because Sergeant Aldrich is the reason I am alive. And what happened to Sergeant Aldrich is the thing I have been trying to explain to myself for 80 years without ever arriving at a satisfactory explanation. I will tell you what happened to him, but not yet. Because before I tell you what happened to him, I need to tell you what it felt like to be 14 years old and handed a rifle and told that the Americans were coming and that Germany needed you.
My name is Franz Josef Brenner. I was born in Cologne in 1931. My father worked at the cathedral, not as a priest, as a stonemason. He repaired the stone. He had been repairing the stone on that cathedral for 20 years when the war started, and he said once, "The cathedral has been standing for 700 years, and it will stand for 700 more, and whatever is happening out there is a temporary interruption." He believed that, right up until the bombs made him stop believing it. I was 12 when they put me in the Hitler Youth. I want to explain what that was like because I think people misunderstand it. It was not, for a 12-year-old boy in 1943, obviously sinister. It was camping. It was hiking. It was learning to read maps and tie knots and march in formation and feel like you belong to something larger than yourself. I was 12. What 12-year-old boy does not want to feel like he belongs to something larger than himself? I put on the uniform and I felt important. I am not proud of that feeling now, but I am honest about it. I felt important. By the time I was 13, the camping trips had changed. There were still hikes and maps, but there were also weapons, basic handling, how to hold a rifle, how to aim, how to load and unload. The men teaching us were not gentle about it. They were soldiers who had been through the Eastern Front and come back with pieces missing and a specific quality of impatience that I now understand, but did not then. They did not explain things twice. They did not comfort boys who were frightened. They demonstrated once and expected compliance. In February of 1945, a man came to our Hitler Youth Unit and explained that Germany needed us, that the moment had arrived, that what we had been trained for was now required. He was wearing a uniform I did not recognize, and he had a clipboard, and he went through our unit one by one and looked at each of us and made a mark on his clipboard. He marked 14 boys out of our group of 30. I was one of the 14. The 16 he did not mark watched us leave. I have thought about those 16 boys many times. I do not know what happened to them. I hope they survived. I need to tell you about the 2 weeks between that selection and the moment in the foxhole with Sergeant Aldrich, because those 2 weeks are the part of this story that is hardest to explain. Not because they were brutal. They were not particularly brutal. Because they were mundane. We were given uniforms. We were given rations. We were drilled in basic formations. We were told what to expect. And then we were put on a truck and driven to a position on the western edge of Cologne and unloaded and told to dig in and wait. The Americans were coming. We knew this the way you know weather is coming. not as a military intelligence assessment, as a physical fact in the air, something everyone could feel before they could see it. There were 12 regular soldiers in our position. Most of them were not young. One of them was Sergeant Aldrich, who was 42 and had been on the Eastern Front for 2 years before a wound to his left leg had sent him back west. He walked with a slight drag on the left side. He never mentioned it. When he first saw us, the 14 boys from the Hitler Youth in our 2 large uniforms with our 2 heavy rifles, he looked at his corporal. Sergeant Aldrich came to me specifically on the first evening. I think it was because I was the smallest. He sat down beside me, not across from me, beside me, which felt different, and he asked me my name and where I was from and what my father did. When I said stonemason at the cathedral, he nodded. He said his father had been a carpenter. He said men who worked with their hands understood things that other men did not. He said, "When this is over, you will go home and you will learn your father's trade. That is what you will do." He said it with such certainty that I believed him. I was 14. The certainty of adults was still something I instinctively trusted.
I need to tell you what happened on the third morning, because the third morning is when the Americans came. And everything I had been told about what that would be like proved to be wrong in almost every particular. We had been told the Americans were soft. We had been told they would not push hard. We had been told that German discipline and German will would be enough to hold our position. Long enough for something to happen. I was not entirely clear what that something was, but the implication was that things would change before the situation became irretrievable. The Americans who came toward us on the third morning were not soft. They did not come the way we had been told. They came in small groups spread wide, using every piece of cover available, walls, rubble, burned-out vehicles. They moved the way water moves around obstacles. And in front of them, and above them, and around them, the artillery and the aircraft moved with them in a way I had never seen described. I heard a radio call go out from our position, a request for fire support, and the response was essentially nothing. What we had was 12 regular soldiers and 14 boys from the Hitler Youth. Sergeant Aldrich came down the line in a crouch. He stopped at each boy and said something. When he reached me, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder and he said, "Aim low, the rifle will pull up, aim low." There was a sound in the air that I can only describe as the sound of something inevitable. And into that landscape, through the smoke and the dust, the Americans were coming, not running, walking, steady, not stopping. I aimed low. I fired. I do not know what I hit. In the chaos, I lost track of almost everything. I need to tell you what happened to Sergeant Aldrich. He was 3 positions to my left, and then he was not standing anymore. And then the corporal looked up and made a gesture, and I understood what the gesture meant. I have thought about Sergeant Aldrich every day for 80 years. The position was overrun within the hour. The Americans who reached our position looked at 14 boys, and they made a decision. An American sergeant pointed behind him, away from the fighting. He said it twice. We went. I went home in 1946. My father's cathedral was still standing. He handed me a chisel, not a word, just the chisel. I repaired the cathedral for 40 years. The only thing I kept was the chisel. Everything since has been the distance between the rifle and the chisel.